welcome to the WorkBuzz webinar of building a stronger workforce in manufacturing and production. What we'll be doing is we have a wonderful panel of people here joining myself to talk to you about some of the things that we've learned in terms of best practices in this side of the industry and what we've learned. Before we get into that, what we will just do is some introductions around the table. So first of all, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Melissan or Mel Foster, and I am Chief Experience Officer at WorkBuzz. To think about that, sorry, apologies. CXO threw me off completely on the screen. I hope you're all well, and I'm very excited to be joined here by some of our clients at WorkBuzz to talk to you about the challenges that we face in manufacturing and production. Hey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Kay Makin. I'm Head of People for Integrated Service Solutions. We're a third-party packing service provider. So we predominantly pack fruit for supermarkets.
Thank you. Over to you.
I'll go next. My name's Pippa. I'm the HR manager for Camellia. We are the world's largest private tea producer globally. And then within the UK, we have various subsidiaries covering engineering, agriculture in terms of fruit farms, and tea that is sold into five-star hospitality.
Pippa. And last but not by no means least, Donna.
Hi everybody, my name is Donna. I'm Head of HR Organisational Development, and I look after anything to do with people development, growth, and also comms and engagement. Been in Hovis for about 5 years in terms of Hovis as a brand, probably reasonably well known, I would hope, but we obviously produce bread and bread products across the UK. We've got 8 manufacturing sites, 2 distribution sites, and a mill.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Hopefully everybody that gave you a flavour for the wonderful panel that we do have. And yes, I know that we said that it's to do with manufacturing and production, but in particular here we have quite a lot of specialism in terms of food and consumption. So hopefully you will come armed with some questions. Please do use the Q&A box that you can see on your screens on the Zoom functions. And what we will do is we'll answer questions towards the end of the session, unless we feel like we can weave it in with some of the pre-planned questions that I already have. Okay, so without further ado, what we will do is kick into the actual questions that we have planned for the day. So starting with some challenges, what I'd like to know is what is the biggest challenge you're seeing in manufacturing in terms of engaging with your workforce, and particularly I think for your industry on the front line. And so in terms of those challenges, how do you overcome the challenges in engaging your workforce on the front line? Hey, if I can come to you and think about ISS first.
Yeah, sure. So we have a range of challenges. One of the biggest challenges is that our workforce predominantly aren't desk-based. So they don't have access to work emails. They don't need to log on to a computer to do their day-to-day job. And I'd say that's probably 80 to 85% of our workforce. We are also working across various shift patterns across the 24/7, 364 days a year. And across 3 sites. And additionally, I'd say about 80 to 85% of our workforce, English that isn't their first language. So a language can also be a barrier to communicating with them and therefore being able to successfully engage them, but also because actually culturally they come to work for different reasons, to perhaps some more kind of predominantly English-based workforces. So we have done a variety of things. So we've been surveying for a few years now and kind of listening to their feedback. We've done a variety of things to try and engage them where possible. And I think one of the things that we've had biggest success with was implementing a communications app last year. So we implemented a communications app which is available on kind of most smartphones that people can download. We make it a choice thing for them, but we do try and push out lots of interesting communication to them. So lots of work-based stuff like job vacancies. We've automated lots of forms and processes. We've given them access to all of our policies through the app as well, which they wouldn't have had previously because they didn't have the computer access. But we also do lots of fun things as well. So we do like little competitions, and we can send little like pulse check-ins with them. We can also do videos. So for the first time ever this year when we did our pay review, our MD actually did a video recording of himself kind of addressing everybody, telling them what the pay increase was going to be, and it meant that everybody could get the same message at the same time, because we weren't relying on kind of 800 letters to be handed out by managers across 3 sites across 4 different shift patterns. So that actually was really well received by the workforce, and they felt that for the first time ever it was a really transparent process, because they could see what everyone was getting, not just what was in their letter. So that's been really successful for us.
I love that. I mean, that level of transparency is probably something that quite a lot of organisations could envy, just being able to roll that out. But that takes some absolutely authentic and, you know, quite leading from the forefront leadership, people that want to make that change, which is brilliant. And great to hear you say include the fun at work. You're not going to get people to engage with things unless there's something fun in there. Really interesting that your 24/7 365 challenge as well. The nature of these businesses is that you are typically always on, I guess.
Yes.
Pippa, how does that kind of flow for you in terms of your challenges and how you need to overcome them?
Yeah, I'd echo all of those that Kay just said. I think we have very similar ones. I think it's asking people to do something that they predominantly see as a work thing, that whilst if they're on shift, they might not want to do what they consider something work related in their own time. So that's definitely a challenge for us. And then I think looking at it through like an employee engagement survey lens, that people definitely want to know that it's an anonymous process that they are doing. I think that's a huge challenge, that people feel like that it's a reason for not completing it, but it's something that we really reinforce, that it is entirely anonymous.
Right. I think that's so important, and just in terms of building that trust, and you've seen it with response rates and just people's ability to give their own feedback, because they won't unless they really believe that anonymity or confidence is kept. Donna, how about you? What's it like in Hovis in terms of challenges, and how do you engage with the front line?
I suppose the benefit in going last is that I resonate with exactly the challenges that Pippa and Kay have gone through. So in terms of our infrastructure, we have a 365, 7 days a week challenge. We have multiple shift patterns across all of our sites. We have some shifts where we don't have aligned line managers, so we have a diverse line manager population looking after different colleagues. So our biggest challenge is to find time with people, which competes with our operational challenges, if I'm honest. So finding a real balance between making sure that we engage with people on a regular basis, but also looking at the different types of vehicles of communication that best fit different populations, because we have preferences, we have different patterns, we have different, we have people who work just night shifts, day shifts, for example. It's a real challenge. So we've tried lots of different things, and I suppose we have to just keep trying. So interestingly, in terms of an app, we tried an app last year and it worked for some populations, but maybe not for others. And part of that was just our demographics. So a phone may be perceived as an easy way to transfer information, but we have a number of people in terms of demographics who don't regularly use that phone for comms. So actually, for those groups of people, face-to-face activity, shift handovers, town halls, the opportunity to engage directly with their line managers in terms of keeping people up to speed in terms of activity works best. So to be honest, in our organisation, we try many different variations in terms of comms. We created, on the back of feedback from our last engagement survey, a supply chain comms pack, where we have sort of central initiatives and activity, because some people really want to know about the business in terms of how it's performing. But then we have localized manufacturing comms and logistics comms. So we try and tailor the messages based on what people just want to know, what's going on around them. And a lot of that's site-led as well, in terms of positive activity, recognition, charity activity, as well as business performance. So the biggest challenge is making time for people. And it's about trying lots of different methods and actually just making sure that we listen to the feedback and demonstrate that we do something with the feedback.
Thank you. It's really helpful. And I think you've really brought some of everything and tied it back in together, as in It's like the time, the channels, and what's in it for me as the end user, as the person that's receiving it. And that really resonates with me, as in thinking about exactly what you said there, the need to tailor messages and tailor channels, because there isn't one size that fits all. We need to be flexible, and we are all human with different preferences. That's critical in terms of any internal communications, but especially when we're trying to get people to fill out surveys. So in terms of your workforces, how have you improved engagement or increased employee response rates across your workforce? Pippa, how have you approached it, especially with your kind of challenges? I imagine you've got people in terms of fatigue and picking things like that. How do you get around it?
Yeah, so I think what we've decided to do is take a really consistent approach, whereby year on year we are coming back at the same time of year, repeating our annual engagement survey. We took some time to really decide which questions we wanted to ask at the very beginning, so that there was longevity in those as well. So we're sort of building up data year on year. And then it also provides us with a kind of consistent messaging throughout the workforce that it's not just something we did once, we listened to once and then went away, that we keep wanting to hear what they have to say. Obviously, within those questions, we can tailor. So during kind of COVID, there were very specific ones relating to that, but obviously we try and keep them the same wherever possible. And I think the thing that we do is talk about it all the time and reference it at any given opportunity as well. We feedback kind of like our priorities for the year based on the results, what we're going to do, these are our actions, how are they going. We seek more feedback as well, so that it's like everyone's involved rather than it just being kind of like an HR or a top-down initiative. I think kind of the anonymity is, again, something that we reference the whole way throughout. So it's when the data is shared, it's not in a way that it, anyone could see where that's necessarily come from. So I think we are consistent in our approach there as well, so that even if the first year we ran it, our rates might not be that great, we build on that year on year, and then people see the consistency in that approach.
Fantastic. I think it's that regular drumbeat rhythm, isn't it, which is quite hard for some people to find, but it's fantastic to hear that working for you and working for the organisation. And I love what you've said about just keeping it alive, which is sometimes the hardest part of the whole journey. It's easy for a survey, very hard to keep it alive. And Kay, what are your thoughts on this question in terms of how have you improved engagement and increased response rates?
So I think I'd echo what Pippa said around consistency, and also demonstrating to them what you've done off of the back of previous surveys. So particularly in the run up to a survey, kind of really re-communicating with them that because you said this, we did this, to kind of remind them that actually we did take actions. And I think if you're not prepared to take the actions, then maybe don't do the listening piece. Because there's nothing worse than giving people the opportunity to have a voice and then doing nothing with it, because it actually becomes probably demotivating and frustrating to them. And we had last year chose to delay our survey slightly because we hadn't completed all of the actions from the previous survey, just to give us time to do that, so that we could go into the survey knowing that we'd completed on the things that we said we were going to, for them to maintain our levels of authenticity around the listening piece and taking action. The other thing that we did this year was we implemented some prize draws to try and encourage response rate. So we said if we get 80% completion rate, then we'll have a prize draw that everybody will go into, and we were offering various prizes like £100 vouchers, extra days holiday, all of that kind of thing. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get the 80%, but it did encourage kind of team encouragement as well, to kind of get them to ask their colleagues if they'd done it, because they wanted to go into the draw if they had. So despite not quite getting the 80%, we did do like a watered down version of the prize draw. So we still offered out kind of 50% of the prizes we were going to offer, but only to the people who had completed, because we didn't want it to become a thing, so that if we do it again next year, that everybody thought, well, I don't need to do it because we'll get into the draw anyway. And to protect the anonymity, going back to Pippa's point about, keeping that confidentiality promise, what we did is we WorkBuzz drew the winners for us, and then as part of the email that they sent out to them, they said, only collect your prize if you feel comfortable with the HR team knowing that you've completed the survey. However, they will not know what your individual results were. So then it was completely down to them, and all bar one of the prizes got collected, because people felt comfortable to at least come to the HR team, show us the email and collect the prize, knowing that we would know that they'd done the survey but not what their answers were.
I love that, and I think there's lots of opportunities to increase response rates, and there's different approaches. So great prize draw. We've seen people do things like charity donations. So I imagine there might be other questions about it, but any other ideas are always great to hear, and what works within organisations. And I love that you haven't set that expectation. Look, this is a one-time, we'll try it, we'll see what you do, we'll tamper it down, and also that need of correcting, it's not enforced, it's correct it if you're comfortable. So it's still a choice for the employee, which is really important in doing these things. Donna, what's been your approach at Hovis in terms of improving engagement and response rates?
So we are in our 5th year of an engagement survey, the last 2 years with WorkBuzz. And I suppose if I look at it in 2 parts, one is the actual survey itself, and then one part of engagement is what you do outside of that. So I think the key thing for us over the last 2 years, working with yourselves, if I'm honest, is that preparation piece before you go into survey. So as Pippa said, the questions are making sure they're really relevant to the business, and they are building on previous questions. We've got 5 years worth of data. We need to think about from a business perspective what we want to focus on, but also keep some continuity with the questions so that we can benchmark year on year in terms of performance. So this year, for example, we focused more on D&I because it was part of our sort of business strategy to get some more feedback and use that as a bit of leverage to actually get some really honest feedback in terms of how we're performing. So I think the question preparation and being really clean with our data up front, so that during the process of the survey, we don't run into technical issues and barriers, and just making sure that we're quite on it. So it's as slick and efficient as possible, making sure that all of our line leads have access to all of our QR codes and all the other stuff that will make that housekeeping and admin of a process easy. So we don't want to create any noise within a process. I think reinforcing anonymity is really important because we still will get questions and concerns, but each year we build upon that trust piece. I think the HR role is interesting because it's not a HR-led process in our business. They're there to help with governance and making sure that we follow and we're attuned in the right way, but ultimately it's about our line managers. So really ensuring that our line managers are equipped with what have we done since. So Kay, you talked about making sure that we reinforce all the good stuff that we've done because it's easily forgotten. And we've definitely found that the sites where they've taken quite a strong stance in, here's what we've done, you said, we did, in advance of the survey has got a better response rate. What we've done this year for the first time in our logistics function is actually run a mini half-year survey to actually make sure that we're on track in terms of some of the actions that we have said we're going to do. So we've literally finished Monday, our half-year survey, so quite excited to see the results. And we are delighted to have a 92% response rate from our logistics function. And actually, it's quite tough sometimes getting hold of drivers to give feedback because of the types of shift patterns that they have. So I think that's credit to the work that happens in terms of making sure we capture data. So I think the process of surveying in itself, make sure you're as on it and prepped as possible. But outside of that, make sure that you're doing something with a survey, because that's obviously going to naturally increase response rates if people feel that they're listened to. I know you're going to ask some questions about the sort of how do you do that later on. But I think it's about linking both of those processes together. So you've got the process of giving feedback and the process of acting upon that feedback and making sure that you revisit on a regular basis. That genuinely, I think, has encouraged our response rates year on year. It's part of our BAU now. That's what we do. That's what people expect to utilise in terms of one of their ways to give feedback into the business.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's the most common reason we have that people stop responding to surveys is because they don't see anything being done, and that survey fatigue kicks in. I think all three of you have covered that in different ways. And this is why, again, it's so useful having a panel with your different approaches to employee listening. But it's about making sure that we're keeping up that pace, we're keeping up the level of communication, taking action, keeping our promises. But I really love the point that you made about the second part, that first part that you mentioned, Donna, is about the process. And what we'll typically find is that the worst response rate will be with your first survey with us, and then it will get better and better and better, because you're building trust, you're building that operational muscle that understands how we do employee listening at your organisation. Line managers get it all of a sudden. People understand when the line managers or when HR get the results, that they're not being used and abused, and that they are protected. And that's how I think it continues to improve. But that's also why employee listening needs to be seen as a long-serving programme rather than just one moment in time. So yeah, I love that you've all got that in your own areas and into life.
Mel, can I also just add healthy competition? Within the service that you provide, we get daily response rates, and our sites love a competition, and come on, that does always drive a little bit of activity as well. You know, you want to be sitting there near the top if you've got a healthy competitive nature.
Yeah. Oh, don't I remember I used to work for an organisation where I actually had to put the exec leadership team, I had to take their faces and put them on horses going around a race course, and one of them got put on a donkey at one point. So yeah, healthy competition sometimes works. I wouldn't encourage that for every culture, but it works within that small group of a team that like to have the competition and joke together. Right. So in terms of employee listening, how has it helped you with your challenges, and what changes have you been able to action because of feedback that you've received? Lauren, if I come to you first, let's switch up the order.
So I think what we've built is a better understanding of what our people want. I think if we were honest with ourselves historically, we created a lot of top-down activity. We assumed what people wanted in terms of information, comms, activities, benefits, for example. And I think what this has given us is a real insight in terms of people's needs and motivations, and being able to tailor that. You know, so some of the, obviously from a site perspective or a functional perspective, we turn our engagement content into something relevant to that local team. So we may have a holistic three-pronged sort of focus in terms of business engagement activities that we want to drive, but we want to make sure that we resonate it down through each of the functions, each of the teams, and make it bespoke, but we keep it simple, because we can't change everything overnight. We can't change everything in one go. So we call out some simple things. We make sure that we attend to it on a regular basis. So for example, in our logistics environment, every 2 months, we make sure that we're checking in on the action plans across all of the sites in terms of what progress has been made, but also what things need to escalate centrally, because we actually need to make sure that we do it from a business perspective because of feedback we've got. So some of the initiatives recently have been about really focusing on the employee benefits that are available to all of our colleagues, and highlighting some of our internal, whether it's cycle to work schemes, for example, or it might be access to grocery aid, which is an institution that we use a lot within our business. So I think the benefit for us has actually been changing our behaviours based on what our colleagues want, what they want to hear, what they want to know about, what's useful for them. And so I think that's been the fundamental change in terms of just inverting our activity as a business.
It's really helpful, thank you. And I think it brings to life the whole purpose of employee voice and employee listening. That's what we should be delivering, right? Great. And Pippa, how about you, coming over to me?
Yeah, I think kind of like following on from what Donna was saying as well, and the kind of consistency approach, what we're building up now is statistical independent data that kind of can't be ignored, and is really useful to take to you know, the kind of leadership team to be able to demonstrate it. And I think one of the things that we particularly love, we include what 3 words. And then so, you know, that's they come back and they're really powerful as well. You know, we had an example where really specifically it identified something in one department within one location, really rather, and it was just, you know, great. That pattern was there that might not have necessarily presented itself in quite that way, and so we were able to go and address that. I think you know, seeing kind of consistent messaging that we have addressed, but if it's kind of coming back year on year, you're able to then build on that. You know, we we're really able to do something very specific around work-life balance, and actually reducing company hours from 40 to 35 over a week, and with no pay cut at all with that, just because it really obviously you know, that has a huge impact, and it's not necessarily something that everybody can do. I do appreciate that's quite a specific one to do. but it, you know, it just sort of shows that we are listening and prepared to take big actions on that when the data is screaming at us. Big actions need to be taken as well. So yeah,
brilliant. I think that's a significant change, and obviously.
I just remembered one more thing, and I think one of the other things that we do that's helped is the line managers now have our survey actions as part of their KPIs annually as well. So they get that there, and you know, we're starting to see a pattern now. Almost it gets to that point in the year when we do ours and everyone's getting a bit excited to see the feedback as well, and when we've been doing things, it's like, oh, I hope everyone's, it's, you know, it's had the impact we were hoping for, and kind of it's you know, that has built up over time in terms of the leadership team sort of thinking, okay, right, okay, we're ready for this. Whereas at first they were a bit like, oh, I'm not sure we want to know. But then, you know, that really helps in terms of you know, getting people excited for it, that kind of consistent approach.
Definitely, and what I love is what you've hinted at there is line managers are always quite a difficult population, and we often, especially in manufacturing, promote people because they're great as individual contributors, but are they ready to take on the skill set that it needs to lead a team, and are they set up for success like that? And it's again what these reports should give them is the understanding of what their people are saying, what pivots they can make, and help them move things forward in terms of that employee experience, because it's quite wide and it's a new thing to learn for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Hey, looking at you, what have you done and been able to change?
So we've changed quite a lot through the listening process. So like I said, one of the biggest things for us was improving the way that we do comms. And I agree with Donna, it's not a one size fits all, and we still have an evolution on that, and we're putting in a new meeting structure and things like that. So there's further work to be done, but I think it's things like that. We've also updated all of our facilities at one of the sites. So I think one of the interesting things is we've grown quite rapidly as a company over the last few years. So when we first started working with WorkBuzz, we only had one site. So, you know, everybody was on the same site and it was nice and easy. Now we're kind of 3 sites. So last year this year when we surveyed, we were only 2 sites. And we've already started to identify differences in engagement across the sites, and then start to kind of overlay that with other data that we've got, like turnover rates and things like that, and you can start to kind of analyze the data in a bit more detail and sort of understand some of the things that are driving that from a business level as well, which has been interesting. But I also think as we've got bigger, the senior leadership team have become more removed from the sites. So because we're not at one site anymore and we're kind of dipping in and out of, you know, 2-3 sites, we don't get to spend as much time with people as we would like to. So we get sound bites. So when we drop in sites, usually the sound bites aren't always that positive, because people use it as the opportunity, if they've got our ear, to tell us the things that perhaps aren't going so well. I think actually sometimes the surveys are a good sense check of also the things that we are doing well. And the things that they want us to continue doing, because I think, yeah, there's always lots of things that we can improve, but actually sometimes it also gives us a sense check that actually, no, we really like that and continue doing that. So it's not about changing everything all of the time.
No, absolutely. So what we're gone is that there's not always just areas to improve. There's going to be areas to celebrate, and you should absolutely celebrate those things. What you have mentioned in terms of using the data and statistical information, you've got nowhere to hide with it. It's the numbers are the numbers, and it's employee representative. It's sensitive of the employee voice and what their wants are. And what I love, Kay, is that actually it's helped you make a business decision there around investing in something, and potentially persuading some people that may not read in terms of hearts and minds and the qualitative work, but that quantitative data. How have the surveys helped you all kind of influence upwards and share things with leadership? Okay, if I come back to you first, maybe on that. Just
sure.
Thinking about.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky. I think as an exec team, we've always been quite bought into it. So I think actually it's not been a case of influencing upwards. It's actually been a case of we're now starting to try and put more ownership on the managers, so that they understand that, you know, it's not just like you said, like a HR initiative or a senior leadership initiative. This is a whole business spanning thing. And previously they haven't had access to their own results dashboards. We've kind of, you know, talked them through it and been quite restrictive in terms of the data that they've had, and we've always come up with the initiatives as more of a leadership team, like this is what we said, and it needs to be big bang, and you know, we've always done big kind of initiatives, big changes. But actually I think we got, you know, reassuringly a really good score this year, and we'd improved our score quite a lot from the year previous. So now for us it's going to be maintaining that and the finessing, so what's going to take us from good to great. And actually that's not necessarily going to be huge initiatives or huge pieces of investment that we can agree as like a leadership team. This is all of the managers taking ownership of their data as well, and just committing to 1 or 2 actions each, because we've got a leadership, you know, a wider kind of supervisory and management team of about 80 across the 3 sites. So it's quite large. So if all of those 80 managers and supervisors just commit to 1 thing each to improve their own kind of individual managerial scores, all of that collectively will add up to those bigger changes and hopefully help see our scores go in the right direction, and also get them to kind of take ownership of this being not just a HR or leadership initiative.
Yeah, so true. The principle of marginal gains absolutely is so relevant here. If everybody increases by 1% and that engagement is carried across, then as you sum it up, it will make a huge difference to the organisation. Donna, how about you? How have you used it to manage upwards?
I think the whole process of collating data is just so insightful, and I think what the data does now is it drives our business focus, and there are different times and different events where it really lends itself in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it. So some examples, we had a new CEO join the business back in November, and one of his focus areas was communication. So we have data at our fingertips in terms of how people prefer to be communicated to, where their frustrations are, if it's being done well, why is it being done well, if it needs to be improved, why. And to be able to go through with our exec team, look, this is fundamentally data that our colleagues are telling us, let's shape our communication strategy around this. Fantastic. It was a brilliant opportunity to say, okay, this year, this is what we're going to do now with the data, and this is how hopefully it aligns to our colleague needs. So that's a great piece. And I think the other thing that our data is really showing us clearly now is the relationship between attrition and engagement, and therefore making sure that our sort of strategy around retention, attraction, engagement aligns with the fact that we've got data at our fingertips, so we can corroborate exactly what we're doing in terms of the specific steps we're taking to manage attrition. So this year, for example, we brought some more recruitment talent in-house, and we've been able to target those in terms of our internal recruitment strategy and what we want to manage in terms of our market activity, but also address some of the challenges from an exit interview perspective in terms of why people may be leaving. So whether it's benchmarking, for example, looking at shift patterns, you know, making sure that we are family friendly, we've got the right policies in place. So the data has just been so rich, and I think every year we just build on it more and more, and it just drives our behaviour aligned to our long range plans. So, you know, we influence upwards because you have to see what's in front of you, and it definitely drives behaviour for all of our Hovis senior leaders across the business. So it's a great tool. I think our challenge, if I'm honest, is just making sure we've got the time and the headspace to look at the data, to look at it regularly, and actually make sure that we are continuously focusing on checking in and monitoring what's happening from a business perspective. So, you know, it's great. It's great. It's just making sure that we have the headspace to look at it. And it's not a HR-driven activity. I said that before. The governance is across the whole of the sort of leadership team within Hovis. We are accountable. You talk, Pippa, about having it in your objectives. Absolutely. You know, we make sure that we live and breathe the data, and therefore hopefully drive engagement. And to be fair, yeah, engagement improves year on year. So we are listening. We may not always get things right, but I think it's about being humble and honest when sometimes we don't.
Love that need for authentic leadership, and yeah, absolutely just focusing back on that retention, and things will be different for different organisations in terms of KPIs you're trying to influence. But that retention piece is critical, I think, for everybody. We're all struggling with it and wanting to keep our talented people for longer. So how can you link that in terms of engagement and things that you're doing already to improve it? Great. And then Pippa, how about you? How are you using it to influence others?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've kind of got 2 points on that. So I think what it really, really helps with is showing our leadership kind of what the true goings on actually are, and not kind of like a filtered by the time it's gone through the supervisor, line manager, and kind of just like a summarized version of what might be going on. It's really, you know, you are literally hearing from every single voice in the company. So I think it can't be painted in any other way, and I think leadership find that really interesting and helpful. And then I think the other thing that it does is it breaks down assumptions from leadership, and it sort of challenges the status quo as well a bit, because if you think over the last few years, especially within all of our industries, our people demographics have completely changed as well. Brexit, COVID, people wanting different careers and all sorts of things. So what might have worked previously, we might have assumed and made an assumption on behalf of a group of people, we just can't kind of do that anymore. So, you know, we really do have to be listening to what people are telling us. And, you know, you can go, well, you know, I've been in HR for over 20 years and we've always sort of done it this way. We absolutely cannot approach it in that way at all. Things are changing all of the time and different external influences. So I think this really does help in sort of challenging assumptions.
I love that, and I think it really brought to the forefront the need for us to listen, because what people are experiencing on the ground, and although you may have done that role 10, 20 years ago, the dynamic has completely shifted as to what people want, the newer generations that are coming through the workforce. We're having to adapt like never before, frankly, because people are changing their own cultures and coming across things that they wouldn't necessarily have seen or be aware of. We've got other clients that, you know, they're looking at 4-day work weeks, and some that get frustrated that they're not already there. So, you know, you've got to have different strokes, different folks, and think about how we communicate and tackle those challenges as we keep growing. Fantastic, thank you all. Just attendees and people joining us on the webinar, I'll just remind you that there is a Q&A box if you'd like to ask any questions. Appreciate, Kay, thank you for answering the one offline about the app that you utilise. I have one more question that I've written for you all, but so in terms of the manufacturing organisations that you work for, what's your top picks for manufacturing organisations who are looking to boost their employee engagement? If I go to Donna first on that question.
Okay, so if I think about our operation, our most essential people in terms of creating that engagement culture are our frontline managers. So we need to remember the role that they play, and we need to make sure that they've got the right skills, the right capability, they've got the right time to actually focus on colleague engagement. So we have to keep chipping away at the organisational priorities that we have and make sure that they've got the headspace and the support to be able to engage colleagues. I think fundamentally in terms of top tips, be true to yourself, have integrity. If you're going to put plans in place, keep them simple, keep them focused on the right things that make a difference. Don't try and do too much. Show progress, celebrate recognition as loud as you can, and celebrate success as well. So it's really easy to get stuck in some of the day-to-day noise that we have in a manufacturing environment, but actually just remember that when people do say something and take action, you can have some real successes. And I think it's making sure that those successes are contributed by many different people. So it's not about line managers taking the lead in terms of turning actions into activity. It's about colleagues being part of that process as well. I think we don't create an engagement environment without everybody wanting to deliver and join in. So look, I think we said at the beginning, it's about making sure that you've got time for people. It's about listening, and it's about creating the right communication channels that are appropriate, but then doing something about it. Fundamentally, we need to listen and we need to do, and then we need to just shout and celebrate. So I probably repeated myself there a few times, but you know, I think
communication's simple.
Yeah, and I just think it's really simple, and sometimes we can get a little bit bogged down in action planning and creating a massive framework and infrastructure behind a process like this. We just need to talk to people regularly and make sure that we're doing the right thing and get feedback as well.
Thank you. Pippa, what's your top tips?
I think having patience with it, and knowing that it's not a tick box exercise, it's not something that you can solve overnight. Yes, there will be low-hanging fruit that you can absolutely do, but it's kind of being consistent in that approach. I think it's being incredibly mindful of your business, knowing your business inside out, and not launching something at a time when there's a million other things kind of going on. You know, any good HR person will probably already know that it's when to weave it in throughout, you know, peak production and you know, that kind of thing. I think don't start it if you're not prepared to do something with it. I think that's the worst thing you can kind of do if you're not then going to act on what you're being told. You don't necessarily have to do everything, but you can prioritize that, and you do have to kind of keep that communication piece going as well throughout the year that Donna said as well. It just, you know, we ran things like pulse surveys if it was something very specific as well, and then kind of keep going back out with the feedback of this is what we're doing. So yeah, I think that's
brilliant. And I think that objective check of a pulse survey or an on-demand poll, it's a quick litmus test to understand if you're heading in the right direction, especially if you're a more traditional organisation that's running annually or biannually. They are really quite important little listens in. Okay, over to you. What's your top tips?
I think I echo everything that Donna and Pippa said, and just to kind of remember there's no perfect formula. What works for one organisation isn't going to work for every organisation, and I think it's about knowing and understanding the culture of your organisation and what's going to work for you, and yeah, just making those amendments and then kind of, you know, getting the feedback back so that if something doesn't work you can kind of fail quickly, park it, accept that it didn't work, move on, try something else that hopefully will be more successful and have the results that you're hoping for.
Fail fast and then faster. Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, that's really helpful, I think, for the top tips there and just sharing your insight and experience. And we do have a couple of questions from the audience. So what I'll just do is we'll start answering live. One from Lucy. And how do you engage and communicate with your factory staff who may not speak English or have access online? Who wants to go first on this one?
I can quickly respond. So I talked about preparation pre-survey. That's really important. That, as I said, we take away any barriers possible. So we have an understanding of where we may have second language speakers across all of our sites, and where predominantly which languages they would be. So we ask all of our HR team to request what languages would be appropriate. So for the last couple of years, we've chosen 3 languages. And actually, in terms of participation, I think with the translations, 2,800 people, we've had 30 people who've taken those up. What we also make sure is that locally there's support in terms of people who may want to have support with them in terms of reading the questions out, for example. So I think we know our people, we know their needs and wants, we're pretty tight, we're pretty close, and we make sure that in advance we check in with people to say, what will make this easier for you? So paper copy type things is something we've done in the past. We changed into a technical online version, which was a bit scary. We made sure that people were supported in terms of what buttons to press, like system access. There was always somebody on hand in terms of making sure they were there. They wouldn't see the responses necessarily. So generally it's about the right support. We know our people, we provide translations where appropriate. And actually we've only had, as I said, 30 out of 2,800 who've taken that. But for those people, we're really glad that we did it, because it was really important that they were able to have a voice, and that just helped them in terms of contributing.
Fantastic, thank you. Kay, did you want to pitch in as well?
Yeah, so for the survey specific, we do, most of our people do it in their translated kind of native language, as you know, Mel, because we send it off for translation. They can respond for the free text questions, they respond as well in their own language, and then you guys get that translated back for us so that we get the comments back in English so that we can make them meaningful. In terms of if it's more generic that the question was being asked, we do various different bits and bobs. So we have a translation system, so we have people who speak English and, you know, sometimes 3 or 4 other languages very well, and can translate kind of easily back and forth between. So they, in our factories, they wear a pink high vis, so we use high vises to determine different roles, and so the translators wear like a pink high vis with their job title on the back, and then all of the languages that they can competently translate between. So if we do need to speak to them, then we can go and just have a quick look and ask somebody to help translate. We also have a translation line, so if it was something more sensitive, for like, let's say, more confidential conversation, disciplinary, something like that, we have a translation line that we can use. If it's super important communication, so say throughout all of COVID and things, we would get all of those translated into the major languages so that they had all of the information in their language that they would understand. And if we are doing kind of like shop floor briefings, town halls, that kind of thing, we ask people to stand in language groups, and then again somebody will translate for that group. So it slows things down a bit, because you'll kind of do, say a couple of sentences, then all of the groups will stand sort of huddled together and translate, and then pause again, you do the next kind of couple of sentences, and same again, and for the Q&A at the end, exactly the same process but in reverse. So
I love that. That's fantastic. And wow, what talented people you must have. I don't think I could ever don a pink high vis myself.
It's amazing. Some people speak 5 languages. It's incredible.
Wow. Is there anything to add to that, or should we?
No, we do really similar approach as well, and we do revert to paper-based surveys where we need to as well, just to ensure that we're literally listening to everyone.
Great, thank you all. I think as well, just in terms of how we listen to offline employees, we do things like kiosk codes and pieces like that, so people can access. There's so many channels and ways of doing things nowadays, so it's important that we just enable people to answer in whatever way that they can. And I think that translation piece is really, really critical. Interestingly, doing pieces around managing across cultures, and also what you've got to be cognizant of is it's not just the language barrier. There's cultural context that exists within your organization that sometimes you can't account for. If you're an external translator, you have to be sometimes present and in person and to really understand what is meant. Right, and then the final question from the audience is from John C. How important is visual leadership supporting frontline managers pre and post survey? Question. Anybody want to start in there? No, not everyone all at once.
I'll take that. So I think it is important to show that you're supportive, but I think there's a balance, because you also don't want people to be overly kind of suspicious that it's false, it's not authentic, it's put on for the sake of the survey, and then something that withdraws again quickly afterwards. So I think it's about consistency. It shouldn't be just for the survey that the leadership are visual and supporting the managers. It has to be something that's consistent, so that people don't kind of naturally suspect that there's other reasons for it, or to feel like they're being intimidated into giving good results, even though it is anonymous, giving kind of inflated results or anything like that on the survey. So I'd say it's a balance.
Nothing worse than leadership turning up to your site for the one time in a year when you're just about to launch a survey. That looks awfully suspect, doesn't it? But did you want to add anything there?
No, I think it's the same. It's just sort of referencing at different points throughout the year. So it's not always something that's perhaps at like a company meeting or a town hall, but it's mentioned in a one-to-one, or it's mentioned at a team meeting, or, we in one particular business share everyone's KPIs, and so it can be seen on there as well. And it's just we were doing some training last week, and I stood up at the beginning and said that, the reason that we're doing this is because it had come up on our engagement survey. So it's just weaving it through the whole year, so that it's not seen as a tick box exercise, and just we're willing them out for like that time of year.
Anything to add?
I was just going to add, I think that we link activity back to our survey. So we're currently reviewing our benefits platform, but we're doing it as a result of a lot of questions that came out during our survey where people didn't necessarily know what benefits there were, or didn't realise the benefits. So even they may not know them, they may not have put 2 and 2 together. So what I see our leadership team doing is referencing back actions to the survey you said we're doing, or this is as a result of. And what I also see a number of our sort of senior leader forums where it's part of the agenda. So in our logistics forum, where all of our logistics managers attend on a monthly basis, it's part of that forum in terms of they do a bi-monthly check-in. Obviously, you need to be really mindful about what action can actually physically be taken within a timeline, but make sure it's appropriate. And also in our manufacturing site performance reviews as well. So I think it's not just about turning up, it's about living and breathing, it's about making reference to, and it's about endorsing and supporting the activity around you and making sure there's a feedback loop as well. So if things have been elevated, if there's something we can't do, because fundamentally we can't, it's about making sure that that communication and language is just making reference to why we can't, but being quite transparent with it as well. And we also reference it in our comms. So we talk about, so you said we did with a regularity as well. It just maintains that language, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. In terms of that comes from keeping it alive, I think that's one of the things that's really come out of this whole webinar, and pretty much every question that we've asked has been, we've got to communicate and keep it alive and keep that loop going. I think that's one thing. The other two key points I've really taken from this is another one is don't assume. You don't have all the answers. Unfortunately, leaders, that top-down dictatorial approaches is at an end. We have to listen and learn from others and use the bottom up to feed us ideas like we've never had before. And the third one, and I think this was really, really important one, is listen to act. Don't just listen for the sake of listening. We've got to make sure that we've got intention behind our listening to move things forward and drive change in a true way. Great. I think that's all of the questions we've had from our attendees. Of course, attendees, if you've got any other questions, we'd be more than happy to answer these offline. I'm sure our panelists will be happy to give you their thoughts and experiences offline. But just to wrap up, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody for listening, and a huge thank you to our wonderful panel. Your experiences and your levels of everything that you've shared here have been phenomenal, and I'm sure everybody's taken away some key learnings and best practice, and we really appreciate your time. In terms of follow-up from this webinar, we will be following up with the recording, any additional resources, and it will come from one of my colleagues, Emily or Fiona. It's a named person rather than just generic WorkBuzz email, so you'll all see that drop into your inbox. And our next webinar is happening on the 5th of July, Wednesday, the 5th of July at 3 p.m. BST. And that's about driving culture and engagement through internal communications. We're partnering with Gallagher on that. So interestingly, Donna, you've just mentioned, in fact, internal comms. So I'm sure if anybody is looking at that and wants to understand a bit more about the challenges, especially in remote workforces, we're going to be covering a lot of that during that webinar. So hopefully another useful one for anybody that's dialed in today. But of course, if anybody's got any questions, wants to ask a follow-up question that we didn't manage to get to today, then please just email us at hello@workbuzz.com. Thank you for joining the session, and I will just wrap up there with another huge thank you to our panel. Appreciate you all for joining us.